Welcome, everybody. We are thrilled to have you join us today as we launch the Foundation's new strategic framework. Today's webinar is focused on one of the three pillars of our new framework, education. Thank you to all of you for joining from near and far, and we are glad to use this webinar format to engage and solicit our partners, new and old, far and close, all of whom are interested in joining efforts to transform and create meaningful opportunities for youth in Detroit to succeed. We'll be answering questions throughout the webinar. In a panel to the right side of your screen, you should see a questions panel. Please type your questions there. We will be replying back as quickly as we can. For questions that come up repeatedly and others we think everyone could benefit from hearing, we will discuss during the last 15 minutes of this call. And now, I introduce Ms. Praditha Thurman, Program Director, Education.
Great, thanks, Terry. I'm Praditha Thurman. I'm Program Director at the Foundation, and I co-lead the Foundation's program strategy efforts with my colleague, David McGee. You'll have a chance to hear from our fabulous program team as we dig into this impact area. As you know, the Skillman Foundation is an embedded foundation focused on improving the lives of youth in Detroit, and we're very excited to launch our new framework, what we've called an opportunity agenda. Before I dig in and tell you more about the education impact area, I wanted to share with you, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about where we've been and what we've learned along the way. So as we go through today's conversation, we'd really like to talk to you about what we've learned as we look back across the last 10 years of work in our Good Neighborhoods initiative, what we've learned in our deep relationships with partners, sort of local and nationally around the work. We really will spend some time thinking about the education impact area and as it relates also to the other parts of the opportunity agenda framework. And then obviously we'll have some time for Q&A. Let me begin with what we've learned. So as we look back over the last 10 years, and actually for quite some time, Skillman's been a leading voice and a supporter of education reform in a number of different ways. From just a smattering of some of our partners doing this work, but when we looked back across our education strategy, we really focused on 4 key pillars. We were looking at capacity building at the school level, especially around our Good Neighborhoods work and the goals that we had articulated around ensuring that there was a quality school for children in their neighborhoods. There was work that we did citywide, like Excellent Schools Detroit, Teach for America, Detroit Parent Network, that also was thinking about the entire ecosystem of education. Some of our work focused in capacity building of individual organizations, really thinking about going deep and building the infrastructure of particular organizations, whether they worked in our neighborhoods or more broadly. And then through our youth development funding stream, we also focused on programs that delivered programming in our schools. There were lots of success as we looked back and many partners beyond the ones that are listed here. But let me list for you 4 important things that we've learned as we've looked back. First, when we focus, great things can happen. What you have in front of you is data around our high school graduation rates. As a foundation, we really decided to focus on improving graduation rates. And as you can see from the data here, not only did the graduation rate increase in our Good Neighborhoods, it actually surpassed the city. What it really showed us is the power of collective action. So it wasn't just the schools that came together to drive that increase in graduation rates. It was the community that was enrolled around the goal. It was a number of partners who were aligning around the goal. And the idea of thinking about how we work together around a goal. And so as we look forward in our strategy, we thought a lot about that importance of having a community ownership of a broad vision around the goal. And quite honestly, also the opportunity of that sort of momentum building wins. So education has been a tough area that people have invested a lot in and felt not like they've gotten a lot of return. So as we look forward in our strategy, we also are thinking about what we're calling momentum building wins, maybe making sure that we're focusing on the whole ecosystem of education, but look at the power of actually what can happen when we focus. 2, as proud as we are around our graduation rates, we also are the first to acknowledge that graduation alone is insufficient. This is data around the academic change in our good neighborhoods over time. And as you can see, mostly the academic readiness stayed flat. There are lots of factors that went into sort of explaining what happened in the schools. But as we look forward, it's really important that we are thinking about more than graduation and meaningful graduation in an intensive way. And that kids have to be prepared in a deeper way. And as we've thought about what that means for our strategy going forward, we know that it means some really dramatic shifts in classrooms. And the things that matter most to classrooms are teachers and leaders. And so you'll see a focus in our framework going forward around really digging in and making sure that we have well-prepared, well-supported teachers and leaders. I also would list that as we look back on our work, we also, a lot of our, especially in the Good Neighborhoods work, a lot of our work was around schools. So we were supporting school, and for lots of reasons, but we were supporting partners to help our schools. We were supporting programs to go into our schools. There wasn't as much of an opportunity to do real deep co-design with systems, with schools, with school systems. And as we look forward, we acknowledge the importance of doing that co-design, not just pushing in and layering in of many well-intentioned programs, but really co-designing some of the work that needs to happen to accelerate this work in classrooms. And finally, thinking much more deeply about how we connect in and out of school time. Research shows us what happens for kids in more affluent communities is that the academic success that children perceive and feel is not just a result of what they're seeing in the classroom 8 hours a day. It's a huge enrichment gap that we think is also important that kids need to have access to. And so to get to meaningful graduation, we know we'll have to focus on these levers as well. Third, we've talked a lot internally with our team and with partners about the importance of data. This is especially important given how fragmented our landscape is. We still have 50% of our kids in Detroit in a traditional school district and 50% scattered across a number of charter schools. And in that landscape in particular, and as we think about this idea of systems coming together, it's really important that we are one, accessing and really holding ourselves accountable in a results-oriented way around data, but also know that we all get better when we are looking at data together, when we are trusting the data. So without some systems sort of growing together around making sure that information is available, there's been a lot of tension around whose data do I believe, and so we acknowledge that, and we think that's an important part of our work. And I also wanted to lift the importance of going beyond the data, right? There's a lot that we learned that we could have reduced ourselves to in thinking about the work by just looking at academic outcomes or enrollment patterns. And it is our commitment to both value and acknowledge what happens beyond data in our work going forward. And there's a ton of power in data to move around actions, but we've talked a lot about the way that the power can be sort of misinterpreted or felt in a punitive way. And so as we have looked at the work, we are really thinking about data in terms of learning and really how we can grow together in this work. And the fourth sort of look back across our work that informs our work going forward is this idea of in our Good Neighborhoods work, we saw great schools emerge. We saw schools grow significantly and impact youth in very positive ways, but it's insufficient because what kids across the city need are great systems of schools, not just great pockets of schools. And so a lot of our work, and many of you who have heard us talk about the framework know we're pivoting in our work to be about more than just programs, but really trying to ensure that there's systemic change, that not just the system of schools, but as you will hear in some of our other webinars around our equity and economy framework, we also think about the system of youth development, the system of early childhood. All of those systems are at an incredibly opportune moment in time, but we believe that the foundation is best positioned to be thinking about this idea of systems change. And lots of folks have asked us, well, systems change, what does that mean, and how do I get funded to do systems change? And we'll talk more about that as we get into the specific areas. But for us, systems change comes in a couple of different ways. It's actually building the capacity of those systems. So thinking about the infrastructure of a school system, the infrastructure of a network of charters, thinking about the network, the infrastructure around youth development. So it's building capacity of that infrastructure. It's taking great programs that are showing success with a small number of kids and scaling them. So it won't be sufficient for us to just be thinking about individual great programs, but to be thinking about scale. And quite honestly, the idea of connections across systems. So those are all elements that also will be influencing where we will go going forward. Finally, I also want to take a moment to pause and reflect on not just what we learned over the last 10 years, but at this very moment in time, how very different our landscape is. And as we think about our results and our work going forward, it's important to acknowledge that the landscape is different. The city is different. The district is different. For the first time with an elected school board and a visionary superintendent, the charter sector is different. There's far more interest in thinking about collaboration and coordination and quality, not just sort of presence in the landscape. And Skillman is different, right? Who we were 10 years ago and what we thought was possible and where our strength was is different. And so, and there's a number of different initiatives in the city. The city's different, philanthropy is different, and it's important that we acknowledge that all of that landscape is also a part of our thinking as we go forward. So let me pivot and talk about our new framework. We're excited to launch this opportunity agenda for Detroit children. We know that the talent is distributed broadly in our city and opportunity is not. And so what you will see us really focus on going forward is making sure that there are greater opportunities for all children in the city. Our results statement, I will read it to you, is really focused on making sure that Detroit children are prepared for and connected to opportunities in an ever-evolving economy and making significant contributions to our city's recovery. As we thought about where the city was and the opportunity and the energy for rebuild, we really want Detroit youth to be able to take advantage and to be a part of that recovery. And so our work then lines up against that. So we've identified 3 key levers that we think are important to creating those opportunities. This isn't another 10-year initiative. This is really the buckets that we think are enduring over the next period of time, and we'll drive into this. We've also identified, again, in that spirit of being results-oriented, how to think about the right kinds of measures. So we'll spend some time, again, we'll have webinars on equity and economy, but I want you to know that they're all interconnected in that result as we move forward. So let me take a moment, as you all have sort of focused on this idea of education. What does our education impact area strategy look like? Our education impact area is focused on creating a continuum of meaningful learning opportunities. And I want to just lift up, this is different than our education strategy in the past. Our education strategy, when we were in good neighborhoods, was very focused at the school level. And so this represents an important pivot for us, where we are thinking about great schools, but we're also thinking about how to connect school systems and expanded learning time. We're thinking about how to leverage our leadership our leadership and others to really take advantage of an ecosystem reset. We think that we want to be pushing for academic success and whole child success for our kids. And we think there are three key ways to move on this vision. One is literacy and numeracy. Kids at every grade need an opportunity to build content skills and non-content skills around success to be successful going forward. I mentioned the education ecosystem reset. There's an incredible opportunity in front of us right now, and we are thinking about how to be supportive of making sure that this reset opportunity is maximized. And finally, this lever around present and ready to learn. Even if we have great teachers, even if we have all those supports in place, we also need to make sure that kids are coming to school and are in cultures that are supportive and creating safe spaces for them to learn. So I mentioned to you that there are these three levers. We're going to dig into each one of them, but I wanted to lift out for you that as we thought about these strategic approaches, there's a combination of both of what we're calling momentum building wins, some very targeted places where we and our partners are calling for making a meaningful impact. In literacy and numeracy, of all the things that we think are important, we think at this moment focusing on third grade reading and teacher staffing, there's nothing more important than a teacher, and we'll talk about the importance of really making sure kids are proficient at third grade. In present and ready to learn, we're going to dig in and really focus hard on reducing rates of chronic absenteeism. And then there are and those are things that we think we can work on with partners and make a difference on in a short period of time if we focus and align our resources. At the same time, there are things that are within the ecosystem reset that we'll talk about that are harder levers. They're critical and fundamental to making sure that we have strong systems supporting kids, but they are harder to measure and they are harder to build some traction on. But we're committed to both. Let me start by talking about third grade reading. The data, the imperative, so people said, well, of all the things that you could focus on in education, why third grade reading? So what you have in front of you is some of the data. And we are all alarmed at the sort of proficiency rates that show up. We know that across all systems, the rates of proficiency are low at third grade. And we know how important it is. Third grade is a lever when kids are moving from learning to read to reading to learn, and so we really need to be thinking about how to increase odds and increase success rates at third grade. There's legislation on the table right now that this year's first graders are subject to around retention, and so we are especially interested. And we're not alone in this. There are many partners, other foundations, certainly the school districts, lots of focus. There's a lot of focus right now on third grade reading, and we think that there's an opportunity to really accelerate our focus and partnership with others to move third grade reading. When we've thought about what does that mean, what do we have to invest in, we're thinking about, again, this idea of that are not investments of resources, but for us, just as important, our investment of time is thinking about how do we collaborate with other funders who are in this space. How do we co-design with schools that are also thinking about this work? We are not likely to invest significantly in early childhood, but as many of you know, our colleagues who were involved at the Kresge and the Kellogg Foundation launched the Hope Starts Here call to action on Friday, and there is a tremendous amount of energy, and the best thing that can happen for kids is that to ensure that they're reading by third grade is making sure that they are entering kindergarten ready, and I'm confident that many of those system level investments in early childhood will benefit this work. In terms of what we will be focusing on in terms of third grade reading, we've identified the importance of awareness and advocacy. How do we think about state policy levers and opportunities to really bring awareness to both best practices and levers for change around third grade reading? How do we partner with our community and ensure that there's an aligned rally around how to support kids early and in that out of school time around third grade reading? How do we take the classroom teaching and really infuse and support more capacity building of teachers, systems around data-informed instruction, curriculum? This is increasingly important, not just at third grade, but across all grade levels, given the shifts of the Common Core and the increased demands of rigor. And then finally, that idea of out-of-school learning. How do we, for our youngest youth in the city, think about meaningful out-of-school learning time, both after school and in the summer, to make sure that kids are on track? We're glad to answer questions that you might have about third grade any of these strategies, but I'm going to pivot now to the next lever that we think is important in teacher recruitment, is in literacy and numeracy, is teacher recruitment. There's nothing that matters more than having a well-supported, well-prepared teacher in moving academic outcomes for kids. And this is an area that is of high concern at the moment. We have heard reported from DPSCD the number of vacancies that still exist, and although they're seeing rates of that decrease by the attention that the superintendent and the board and the team are placing on that, we know that this rate is as high across some of our charter sector as it is across the district. And more than just the vacancy rate, we know that statewide there's an imperative. We're seeing a 40% decrease in enrollment in a 40% decrease in enrollment in teacher prep programs statewide over the past 5 years. And that when we look at patterns, we know that the mobility patterns, we know that teachers are also leaving the city of Detroit faster than they are in other places. So the 15% of teachers are leaving teaching, whereas statewide it's 8%. We will get into the work of developing and supporting teachers, but over the next 3 years, we will be working hard with our partners to think about how to really address and draw attention to this issue around teacher staffing, so that we can really create some more robust pools for teachers and leaders, quite honestly. So our investment in this area will focus on 4 key things. 1, building capacity of schools and districts to really be thinking innovatively about how to recruit, and as importantly, how to support new teachers. We need more teachers in the classroom, and we need them to be prepared and supported so that they will stay in the classroom. There's work that we think there are opportunities to be thinking more broadly about a citywide narrative. The teaching as a profession has become battered, and some of the rates of decrease in enrollment are not surprising to many of us. And so we are thinking about how to, as a city, think more deeply about the narrative and a recruitment strategy. We also know that as we've talked to youth, as we've talked to teachers, there needs to be more of a focus around sort of support and culture for teachers in schools. And that we think is not just for new teachers, obviously, but teachers in general across all levels of experience need to be better supported. And then finally, thinking about more partnerships and pipelines that will draw and attract teachers into teaching and into teaching into Detroit. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Terry, who joined our team, who will talk about our Present and Ready to Learn strategy.
So as we look at, again, the Present and Ready to Learn strategy, the focus is chronic absenteeism. It's shown through the numbers that exist that it's one of the greatest inhibitors of student success, not only across the country, but specifically here in Detroit, because of its steady erosion over time over a young person's ability to gain the information and the skills they need to be successful, not just in the present time, but as they progress through high school, college, and career. So specifically, we know that the data that is present around the absenteeism rate within Detroit Public Schools is at 58%. And what's important is that what is that indicating number, and that's 10%. So students are missing more than 18 days of school year. Again, they're not in the classroom to learn, and if they're not in the classroom to learn, then they're missing out on meaningful opportunities to build skills and knowledge base that will be helpful to them in the future. So as the foundation looked to figure out what levers would be helpful to really moving student outcomes, we really took our lead from the community. And in the work that Brightmore Alliance, 482 Forward, and Urban Neighborhood Initiatives was able to establish, we were able to really see that that was what the community saw as being a need, and figured out how do we as partners assist in building our capacity to be able to meet that need. So as we look at chronic absence, it's really about how do we, within our investment, look to data and planning as a way to help school-level attendance teams make better intervention strategies, identifying barriers and interventions, so knowing not only the reason why students don't come to school, but also looking at the reasons why the students that are succeeding, why they do come to school. Understanding that school culture in school and out of school plays a tremendous role in helping students feel comfortable and confident in being able to be present and ready. And then looking at community awareness and action. Again, through the examples that we have through the citywide attendance table, there are various movements that is occurring to not only build and spread the message around the importance of students being in school all the time, but also looking at ways how we support our school partners, DPSCD and charter, to create systems that are scalable and can be tailored to meet the needs of students and parents to get to school all day, every day. So this is an exciting opportunity for us that we look forward to figuring out how this takes place and how it takes shape over 2018.
Great. Thanks, Terry. So you've heard us talk about third grade reading, you've heard us talk about teacher staffing rates and recruitment, and you've heard us talk about chronic absence. Those are places we're going to go deep and very focused around impacting those outcomes. And at the same time, I mentioned to you that there are ecosystem levers that we know are important to move, if not easily measurable. So in addition to those three targeted areas, we have also identified an area of work that we think is critically important around the ecosystem reset, and three levers of investment that we will also be investing in with partners around this work. So first, the idea of actionable data. We are committed to co-designing and co-building systems of data around making sure that we have not just data. In education, we're often drowning with lots and lots of data and reports and information, but how can we be thinking more deeply about actionable data that helps spur collective action, that spurs learning across systems, and that is really in support for families and community partners. We're also thinking about more than just teacher recruitment, but teacher development and retention. And in addition, you'll notice we didn't say teacher development, we called it educator development. We are committed to and can't underscore enough the importance of principal and system leader development as well. This system, to move the educational ecosystem, means deep investments in building the capacity, thinking about pipelines, thinking about culture, and we, with our partners, want to think about how to really accelerate and amplify educator development and retention. And finally, most critical to a strong ecosystem reset is our continued commitment to family and community engagement. Supporting the partnership between families and schools on behalf of their youth is critical.
Beyond our work alone in the education, equity, and economy area, we're also thinking about different platforms and strategies that will allow us to more thoughtfully integrate and support all of the work that we're focusing on, but also the priorities of the city as a whole. So these 4 community initiatives, the Cody Rouge Project, the Detroit Children's Fund, My Brother's Keeper Detroit, and the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, are all efforts that we join in partnership with, that the foundation is intimately involved in order to work collegially to move outcomes on behalf of young people. For this particular webinar, I do want to lift 2, in particular, the Detroit Children's Fund and also the Coalition for the Future of the Detroit School Children. The DCF, the Detroit Children's Fund, is really designed to change the odds for Detroit children by providing exceptional learning and development opportunities both inside and outside of the classroom. It's a partner organization of the foundation focused on developing 25 high-quality seats by 2025, deep schools investment in making sure that we can articulate and scale what actually works on behalf of children in schools. As it pertains to the coalition, many of you all may have been familiar with the coalition efforts in the past, but the coalition in and of itself has relaunched. It's comprised of 8 focus groups, engages more than 100 individuals across the community, both from the public and the private and the philanthropic sectors. And the call to action report is scheduled to be released later this year that will kind of cascade a series of recommendations as it pertains to improving educational outcomes for children in Detroit.
We wanted to lift the initiatives. The Skillman Foundation, as we've done our work in neighborhoods, always had work that we were engaged in and leading. And as David articulated, part of what we're trying to do is, one, be much more transparent about those platforms and how they integrate into our work. But also, those are platforms for some of the deepest partnerships that we have and moving our agenda forward. I know we've gotten a number of questions that we will get to. Before I do that, I just wanted to answer this question about applying for funding. And in our work around this, we will continue to develop partnerships. Skillman, our education strategy has not often relied on unsolicited applications for funding. Part of the work that we have always done and will continue to do is deep in our partnership in the landscape, working with partners, identifying gaps. And if you believe you have a program that can meet a program or a solution for some of the areas of focus that we've identified, we'd encourage you to reach out to our program staff and to have some early conversations before submitting an application. Many of the investments that we have made and will continue to make in this space are likely to be driven through some interaction. There are some places, as we think about this work, that we'll be doing some systems investment, but also some programmatic investment. As David articulated around the Cody Rouge project, we're likely to do some deeper programmatic interventions in that space and maybe releasing some RFPs, as David talks about that. As we get into the equity and the economy areas, we'll also be doing some targeted release, but those are not on the short time horizon for the education strategy. But I would encourage you to continue to reach out and to talk to your program officer or others on the program team to share what you're working on and how it might fit into our work. So lastly, just wanted to introduce so you have in front of you the whole breadth of the program team behind this work.
Okay, we're ready to get into the Q&A section. My name is Ashley Edenbaum. I'm an Associate Program Officer with the Foundation. We're going to try to target the questions that are the most high level and broad to benefit the most people, but we should have time to get into some of the more specific questions as well. So first of all, we had a question about what we mean by partnering with early childhood efforts, since we may not fund them directly. Punitha, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we are, along with a number of other funders, part of an early childhood funders collaborative, and we will continue to remain a partner in that work. That means that we fund into the collaborative. The collaborative is working in particular around some Head Start work and maybe thinking about different kinds of investment. But we are, and likely our investments will go as far as working with others that are deeper in this space, but we are not likely to fund individual programs or schools investing in who are working exclusively with early childhood.
Can you paint a little bit more of a picture on what you mean by Ed Reset? What is the long-term vision for the foundation around that work? We know you touched on it earlier, but just to follow up.
Yeah, so our vision around the education ecosystem reset is to really capitalize around the school systems getting stronger. So thinking about how we have a strong DPSCD, how we have a high-quality charter sector, how do we have the supports for families that can access and ensure strong outcomes around that work. So our vision is in the ecosystem is to really make sure that all of the different elements around education are high capacity, delivering on youth, on quality outcomes for youth, and strong and connected together.
Great, okay. We're getting into some of the more program-specific questions, so I'll just start to call them out, and we have different folks in the room who can help to answer these questions. So does the Ed Reset also include youth development through arts-related educational programs and opportunities?
So we have a commitment, as you can imagine, to whole child development, but the ecosystem and many of our partners, such as the district in their strategic plan, has called for the return of arts and culture in school, arts programming in school, but we, through our education ecosystem reset, are not likely to fund individual programs around that work.
Yeah, from a youth development standpoint, and we'll get into this a little more in the equity webinar tomorrow, and if you aren't able to make it, we can definitely, that webinar will be available via our website. But as we continue to think through our youth development strategy as a whole, we will continue to embrace and operate under the ACT framework, the Achieve, Connect, and Thrive framework, and arts and other related aspects are embedded in that framework, but we'll touch on it a little bit more tomorrow.
Okay, how will we be working with faith-based groups and neighborhood churches?
Again, I think in our community leadership strategy in the equity space, where we're talking about how to build strong systems and leaders around that work, I could imagine some outreach around faith-based partners in particular. Part of what we're trying to do in both our community leadership and our family and community engagement work is to think more about all of the partners and stakeholders that can come together to align around a goal. So there isn't a specific faith-based strategy per se, but we are interested in thinking about how lots of stakeholders and partners in this work can align around the goals that we've articulated.
Does anyone want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think the faith-based question is an important one, as well as additional groups and organizations. We view all of our work, as Finita articulated at the top of the webinar, to be done in partnership. We understand that there's a role that we have to play as a foundation. So be it the faith-based community, public and private sector, we're always looking for strategic and intentional ways to engage partners to deliver results.
And then if there's something that we specifically at the foundation are not working on, again, in partnership with organizations like the Youth Development Commission, community school coordinators, we're able to help navigate those systems to the appropriate parties that can best make use of those services that are being offered.
Will we support special education services with accommodations?
We know how important special ed is, but that is, and it's a critical aspect of some of the work that we talked about, both in third grade reading and all of the aspects around literacy development. It's a tough question without some more detail. We know it's important. We're open to ideas around it, but this is also a place where we will be working with our school partners to understand better what the needs are and what the gaps are around that work.
I would also just add that the Education Coalition work that the foundation is involved in has done some targeted work around special education funding and looking at how to make sure it's properly funded going forward, because there is kind of a disconnect there between the federal mandate and what's funded. So there is that, in addition to the programming component, there's that as well that the coalition and the broader community is going to be looking at together. Received another question around how can people who work outside of Detroit learn from Skillman's best practices, and perhaps specifically recommendations you have for supporting and developing educators. Maybe somebody can talk about the analytic review work and touch on some other pieces. Natalie?
Sure. Hi, this is Natalie, Communications Officer. Recently, the Skillman Foundation published an analytic review. It's actually a series of reports that are available on our website at skillman.org/GNI. It's GNI for Good Neighborhoods Initiative. So Good Neighborhoods Initiative was, it rolled it over into 11 years. And it focused on 6 Detroit neighborhoods. However, our education work was citywide for much of that time. Education has a specific report that you can download at skillman.org/GNI, as well as a larger analytic review that summarizes key learnings that not only go into the education strategy, but how other points of our strategy around community leadership, engagement with residents, schools, educators, and so forth, all played a role in helping us move outcomes for students in Detroit. So I'd encourage people to start there.
Yeah, and I'd say going forward, one of the things that we have talked about as we think about how Skillman is different and this result that we've articulated around moving outcomes and playing more civic leadership roles, we've been working with Natalie and with our partners to think about how to document what we're learning, what our partners are learning, and in more real short cycle time, publishing pieces, using our social media, using our blogs as ways both across the city and the region and the state, but for those who are interested even more broadly than that, to learn about the tremendous work of educators and youth across this city in more real time. So you will see us using our communication channels in ways to help share that information out. And I'd encourage you, if you have a specific question, to feel free to reach out to us as well. We learn a lot from partners in other cities and hope that we can share what we're learning as well.
Here's a very practical question. What is the time frame that we anticipate regarding actual funding?
Some of that funding has started now. So we have already started funding into this new framework. There are partners that we've identified, efforts that we're starting to launch around that work. And if you have questions or want to be considered for funding, please reach out.
Okay, received a question about who is the best person to contact around the education pillar strategy.
My email is at the front of this webinar, and we'll be sharing materials from it. Start with me, and I'm glad to answer questions and glad to engage our team broadly and direct you in the right place.
Okay, has your development of the strategy been informed by Michigan's ESA plan and or the Governor's 21st Century Education Commission and or other conversations with state government?
Yeah, we have had great opportunity to look at all of those levers. We're very aware of those reports. There's lots of things that are called for in that work that you'll see reflective in what we want to have happen in Detroit as well. But I think it's a matter of also having read and seen those reports, but also trying to be informing, not just informed by, but informing of those reports. So there are things that are important to us in Detroit that we also have advocated to see better represented in those state conversations. And third grade reading, again, is a particular place that partners like Ed Trust Midwest, partners from across the state have been thinking deeply about, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity to have positive influence on some of the state policy levers and state investments that can be directed towards Detroit.
Another practical question, is there a range of funding, are there a range of funding levels for potential grantees to be mindful of?
No, we haven't set any particular standards, which is why I'm encouraging you to reach out to program officers.
Okay, we're going to get into a couple. Because we have time, we can answer a few of the other more program-specific questions. So around attendance, are we looking at enforcing current laws and policies?
So we are really working hand in hand with Attendance Works and the citywide attendance team. So looking at the systems as part of that lever part of that work that's occurring. So it's not just looking at punitive matters to reinforce attendance, but also looking at strength-based opportunities in regards to incorporating targeted after-school programs, looking at better ways of engaging parents in the space of school so that they feel comfortable and confident in being in that space, and also rewarding students for improving their attendance. So that, again, attendance is being at school is not looked at a punitive factor, but also as a positive way to build skills and relationships with adults.
Okay. Do we have information on the school to prison pipeline and how the number of prison beds in the future are determined by the third grade failure rate? I would first just say yes, we're very aware of this connection, and it speaks to the importance of both of those lines of work and how they are mutually reinforcing. But if anyone from the team wants to add to that, we're certainly appreciative of that fact.